Welcome to our Arni's birthday Zoom. A very special guest today, Neil Bemenderfer. And with a name like Bemenderfer, it's a household name, I think. I mean, you don't forget a guy like Neil Bemenderfer. I never did. I had the privilege of being around him in his senior year at Purdue as a basketball player for Coach Lee Rose. He was recruited or transferred to Purdue with Fred Schaus. We'll get into all that. We want to thank Arni's birthday Zoom, and we thank them for their sponsorship as well. Neil, we had so much offline discussion, as always is the case. We had about a half hour of discussion. Most of it we could reproduce. Some of it we probably couldn't. But first, welcome, happy birthday. Number 32 is 68. That's hard to believe, but you're a young looking 68, and you look great. And hope today is a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
by the way, I have to say thank you to Arni's as well. I still go there in Indy and always think fondly of our days going there back in Lafayette.
Oh yeah, Kurt Cohen runs the one in Indy, and of course, brother Brad does a lot of it up here in Lafayette. But we appreciate the plug. All right, Neil Bemenderfer, the saga of Neil Bemenderfer to Purdue. Obviously played at Rochester High School. Started at Vanderbilt and then transferred. And it was long before the transfer portal and the world that we live in now. But talk about that and that experience of what got you. Fred Schaus, I think, I know was the head coach in that transfer year. But how did that happen? How did you get to Vandy in the first place, and what got you up to West Lafayette?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and especially my birthday. I have to say, as I recall, I said, Alan, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel.
No, I'm not. This is the top.
Interview me. I made bad basketball decisions all my life. I grew up in Rochester in a family that didn't really play organized athletics, and I think I was in the eighth grade when the local pharmacist, Park Baxter, God rest him, came to me and said, "You really ought to start playing more basketball." And I was like, oh, and started playing and kept growing and was extremely fortunate. So I went to Vanderbilt because I was looking for a team that had good academics and good athletics. They had just won the Southeastern regional and went to Vanderbilt. Didn't work out. And, it's one of those things that in retrospect, I probably just wasn't playing up to it, quite frankly. But at that point, I contacted Lee Rose. I'm sorry, I contacted Fred Schaus. And said, "Coach, you recruited me a couple of years ago, and I'm coming back to Indiana. And are you still interested?" And thank heavens, he said yes. And then I do recall getting a call from Hodges and King from Indiana State, and they said, "Well, you're coming back to Indiana, or maybe, and could we come down and talk to you?" So they took me to Burger King across the street and bought me a Whopper and said, "We really would love for you to come visit Indiana State."
Right.
And I did. And Larry Bird and I had roomed together at the Bloomington Herald Telephone All-Star Banquet,
game, right?
Which was Bobby Knight. That wasn't an all-star game. It was only
a banquet. Okay.
And it was an excuse for Bobby Knight to get all the good recruits down to Bloomington and schmooze them down there. So in any event, I knew Larry, and at that point, Alan, yet another bad decision. I wanted to go big time. And the only thing anybody knew about Larry Bird at that point was that he couldn't make it at IU,
right?
And had left. And so I signed with Purdue, and Joe Barry Carroll signed 3 weeks later. And I said, you might as well get things straight there. So but things work out the way they're supposed to, and I think I was meant to be Joe Barry's backup.
Yeah, I think that's a great story. You those were good and bad. Now, you would have had a chance to win a national championship at Indiana State, or at least get to the national championship game. But you didn't have you had a pretty good career at Purdue, obviously winning a share of the Big Ten championship your senior year. I got to go back one step because I forgot my first question that I was always asked. Birthdays for Neil Bemenderfer for growing up in Rochester. what was the special thing that you did? And if anything, at this time of year, it was probably on the lake somewhere or doing something outside, I would assume, on June 21st.
Well, it's never been a big day. I remember
Yeah.
Thelma Ransdell that I lived with at Lafayette, that bless her heart and God rest her,
Yeah.
always said, you know, Neil, it's just another day.
Yeah.
And so it's never been that big deal. I will say, though, that yesterday I felt a little robbed, Alan, because I've always enjoyed the fact that my birthday was on the summer solstice, longest day
Yes.
of the year. I always said first day of summer. I always said I had the best birthday in the world, and all of a sudden I found out that yesterday was the summer solstice.
Yeah.
So I was going to tell you that it was some astronomical mystery, and realize that, and I was going to say that somebody from Purdue, I'm sure, could explain why that is, and instead I sucked it up and did a little research yesterday. And it's because a year is really 365.2 days, and so it rotates. But I was happy to hear that I'll come back to the summer solstice if I'm lucky enough to live another year or two. So.
That's the great thing about these birthday Zooms. We get astronomy. We're going to talk a little law here in a minute. We get memories of backups, etc. Let's go. We'll retreat back to your playing time. Obviously, 1979, 78, you played under Fred Schaus in his last year in a very talented team that didn't perform, didn't get quite as far as it would have liked to. But the following year, you surprised everybody by getting a share of the Big Ten championship. Talk about that transition from Fred Schaus to Lee Rose, but also that team: Joe Barry Carroll, Jerry Seasting, Brian Walker, Neil Bemenderfer, all household names. But what that team was like under first-year coach Lee Rose.
Coach Rose was terrific, and I felt very fortunate when he showed up, because I recall him taking me to his office and saying, "Hey, Neil, I'm new. You're new. It's a new year, and you can play." And I was like, "Oh, really?" So I tried to work hard that year and was very fortunate to be on the team, and I loved Lee Rose.
Yeah, and an opportunity to we talked offline about this was a who's who of the Big Ten, and of course you talk about playing Larry Bird that year, and Indiana State beat Purdue, and they went undefeated during the regular season all the way up to the national championship game in a tough game in Mackey Arena. But just the guys that you got to play against. I mean, all the way back down to a picture that we're going to show on the bottom here, where you played against the Soviet national team in Vladimir Tchichenko, maybe the only man that's played in Mackey Arena that could be bigger than Zach Edey. I'm not sure. He certainly was wider than Zach Edey. But talk about that experience with that team and how much great competition you guys played that year.
Yeah, it was really something. I have said through the years that I got my ass kicked by some of the finest names in the game. But yeah, Kevin McHale and Larry Bird, and just one name after another. It's kind of like the Joni Mitchell song, Alan. You don't know what you got till it's gone. Unfortunately, yeah. I wish you wish you could go do it all again.
Yeah, and you and all that you got to do and do well. A chance to win a share of the Big Ten championship, like I said, go to the NIT finals. A tough loss to Indiana, but you had a chance after playing at Purdue. Went to law, and I should have done my homework. Did you go to law school right away, or tell us a little bit about it? What transpired after senior day in West Lafayette?
I owe a lot to a poetry professor of mine named Yetman, and yeah. I believe Michael Yetman is still perhaps at Purdue, and Professor Yetman called me in and said, "I heard you're thinking of going on to law school or staying on." He said, "Go try law school." He said, "You can always come back if you want to." And I always thought that Professor Yetman just knew how shitty my poetry was. But I owe it.
No.
I owe it to Professor Yetman that I did. Oh yeah, another joke of mine through the years, Alan, is that I went to Purdue, and I do have ENG after my degree, but it's English, not engineering.
There you go.
Yeah. And so anyway, I went to law school almost by default, just because to put off reality and didn't know what I wanted to do, et cetera. So I went to law school in Indy, graduated, got a job up in Michigan, practiced 5 or 6 years in Michigan as a litigator. Uh, Met and fell in love with my wife of 35 years, Lynn Bemenderfer, who at that point was finishing her residency in OBGYN. And she was going to come up. I said, I love you. Come on up. Let's get married. And I love Michigan, and I want you to come up here. And she did. She had a couple interviews, and we realized that Indiana is one of the best places in the country for her to practice OB.
Yeah.
And it's just a much more protective system down here, and limits on liability and much cheaper premiums and those sorts of things. So I told my firm, I love you, but I'm going back home to Indiana.
68 years young and still working with the Mediation Group, something that you founded. Talk about that, and just, not that you should be retired. You can work as long as you want to, but talk about that philosophy at that age. And as you get to that, and what you want to do over the next, we'll be doing a birthday Zoom with you in 10 years. I promise you, it'll be part two. But just tell us what you're thinking about. It's always an interesting. I'm 4 years younger than you, and I'm always thinking about what are guys thinking in this process. How much longer do you want to work? You want to work till forever? How do you view that?
No, I want to work as long as I maintain relevancy. Alan, there was a cartoon in the Wall Street Journal years ago. One Salt and Pepper. It's the one frame black and white cartoon, and it was some dude leaning against his desk, looking out over probably the Hudson River or something.
Yeah.
It looked like it was maybe New York. And he's on his phone. And he says, "Oh, not much. Just trying to maintain relevancy." You. And so I feel
Me
very.
too.
I love what I do, and love mediating. And I don't have any particular exit time plan. My wife did and loves it. We have a couple grandchildren now, and hopefully more to come. And so I'll keep going as long as I maintain relevancy. Maybe take a little more time off, those sorts of things.
And you cut off for a second. Your wife is still working. You said she's still.
No, actually, Lynn retired in April.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
You just cut off for one second. All right. One of the things you have a lot of claims to fame, that even though we're introducing them on the fly here today. Two of the most intellectual front court guys in the history, Joe Barry Carroll and Neil Bemenderfer. Did you ever have, because Joe is Joe's gone on to great things in art. He is a thinker. He was a thinker as a player. Did you ever have one of those conversations with Joe where you contemplated the world as it is, or what kind of relationship did you have as his backup? Joe was a great guy, as I think we both would admit. But to talk about that relationship and what it was like to back him up.
I always appreciated Joe. I also thought that he was a very deep person.
Yeah.
That there was a lot more to than you perhaps realized at the surface. And I've been so proud of him from a distance, watching his art career and
oh yeah, it's amazing.
and all those sorts of things. One of my biggest disappointments was that when he had his show in West Lafayette,
Yeah.
3, 4, or 5 years ago.
He's had a couple of them, but yes, yeah, right.
Well, so I was in touch with Joe for the first time in all those years, and was planning to come up there. And then I had a mediation that ran over. It was a terrible, terrible case with some fatalities, and I just couldn't get away. So I missed Joe. I missed him. And I recently sold my 182, my Cessna 182. I owned it for 10 years. I rebuilt it. I flew it to, oh golly, Lynn and I have flown to Prince Edward Island in Maine and Vermont, and I flew to Wyoming, and I flew to other places out west. And then it was just 3 years ago, I flew to Alaska. I flew myself to Alaska, and just sold the plane. But I'm disappointed, because I always thought that I would get down to Atlanta and drop in and talk to Joe. And I hope that still happens, but I'll be flying commercial, I think.
Yeah, and he would welcome that, I'm sure. We get to visit with him about once a year. I always learn something interesting as well. I can't vision you in a Cessna 182. You got to have that seat back a ways at 6'10". Is it accommodated well for you? And
Yeah, the
is
182.
your wife tall?
No, Lynn is
Okay.
5'5", I think.
Okay.
And the 182 is a great tall man's airplane. It's the only one I would fit into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I love people that always fly in good weather. That's you know that and that.
Well, actually, I was instrument rated, and that's some of the fun
So
stuff when you're in the soup.
yeah, there you go. There you go. All right, I got to ask you about the obviously Purdue's magical run to the Final Four this year. A lot of fun for Purdue alumni. I want to first ask you, how would you have guarded Zach Edey? You had the experience with Vladimir Chichenko of the Soviets at the time. Would you just wave at him as he went by? Would you let him do? Would you help you had double team all the time? He was a terrific player and a great individual as well.
You just do what little you can. I do remember Joe Barry at halftime of the Russian game so many years ago, sitting by himself, and I heard him talking to himself, just saying, "That's a big man. That's a big man." And I'm sure that everybody going against Zach felt the same way. I've never met Zach. I've never had the opportunity, but just it was so much fun to watch them this year. I don't get to Mackey much because the person in front of me doesn't enjoy the experience very much, and I'm afraid I don't fit very well in the seats. So I don't get up a whole lot, but watched with great enthusiasm this year.
Yeah, it is still a great place. It was a great place when you played Michigan State, Arnett Hallman. I have to ask, where were you? I'm going to guess you might have been on the bench, but tell us about that shot. Of course, the famous shot, 79. Purdue beats Michigan State in the eventual national champions and Magic Johnson. Do you have a good anecdote about that moment in Mackey?
Well, I knew you'd get mean sooner or later with the bench comment. Yeah, I tell people I had one of the best seats in the house most of the time. Yeah, I remember that like it was yesterday. It was I can still remember, and maybe you can too, Alan. The shocked look on Arnett's face.
Oh yeah.
He was just flabbergasted, and everybody was. It was huge.
And I think it was the only shot. He was I think the fifth option. Lee Rose was the world's greatest schemer for drawing up plays, but at that one, for whatever reason, not that it didn't work, it worked perfectly. He made the shot. Do you remember the victory lap after that? Because
I do.
Lee was famous for the only coach in Mackey Arena history. The only time Purdue's done victory laps, Lee Rose did them a couple times. Do you remember that experience?
I do remember, and I didn't realize that's the only one, and that's a also great memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, Lee Rose, a great tactician. I always ask guys in your professional career, what did you learn from that experience of playing at Purdue, and in terms of coaching styles? You were recruited by a very different person, Fred Schaus, than Lee Rose in terms of just style, etc. What did they teach you as you moved into your career? What does that help? What does this help that sustain you over the years, if at all?
Well, that's a good question. I hate to tell you, but I think I was probably oblivious going, as when I was playing back then. It was just such a rush. It was such a new thing, and again, you wish you knew now what you knew then, or I'm sorry, you knew then what you know now, and that you could do it again.
Yeah, no question. All right, go ahead.
Yes, sir. No, you go ahead.
Well, last question, because you got places to go on this birthday, but I had to ask, in the world of NIL, transfer portal, are they going to do back pay to players back to 1979? I don't think so. I don't think you're going to get any money. But talk about the environment as you look at it today, and you look at it from a very, it's totally different. Not only just the money, but just the attention that guys get in recruiting on down the line. But are you hopeful about the future of college sports, or how do you look at that based on what you're seeing today?
Yeah, I'm sure we've got to be hopeful. There's no other way to be.
Yeah,
It's way different. When I transferred, you had to sit out a year, you had to pay for the year yourself. You couldn't have any help. I'm a bit concerned with the portal, operation now, and hope that. I mean, I'm somewhat ignorant, Alan. Can a guy transfer 4 times now?
they can. As of right now, they can.
Yeah,
Everybody's
that
free. It
concerns
has
me.
to stop. That will probably stop at some point, but it hasn't yet.
I liked the sports writer's idea of perhaps a transfer fee,
Yeah, yeah,
to a smaller school.
yeah. It's
That
gonna,
that but I'm the wrong guy to ask. I'm much less knowledgeable than you or most of your listeners.
yeah. All right. Well, I wish you a great rest of your day. I hope you get a special birthday meal and certainly a little time in the lake on a very hot. This may be one of the warmer birthdays of your life, at least in West Lafayette. And I'm sure it's that way where you are as well. But happy birthday to you. Thanks so much for taking the time. It's been a pleasure. Great to reconnect. You and I reconnected in the hallway of a game in Mackey Arena. I think you were with Jerry Seasting as well, and I was glad to do that. And you sent us, I was going to say too, sent us some old game film that I'm still working on to getting it to the right place. Some classic Purdue basketball film. A lot of fun with that. So, Neil, happy birthday and have a great rest of your day.